Welcome into another special edition of the Fast Lane. Trey Lau here with you now, previewing the Liberty Flames, their season right around the corner. College football is back. Football is back. And to join me, he is with us every Monday, the news and advance, Damien Sordelett. Dame, first off, thanks for joining me. And how excited are you that football is back?
Trey, it's great to be on with you, and I'm looking forward to that noon kickoff Saturday with Nebraska and Northwestern.
In
Albeit
Ireland?
they're playing in Ireland of all places. And don't forget, Western Kentucky and Austin P actually kick off an hour earlier, and that's the first kickoff of the year. That's the future CUSA opponent for Liberty. New Mexico State plays Nevada later that night on ESPN2. New Mexico State's another Conference USA opponent. So essentially, if you're a Liberty fan, this is a great week to sit back, watch some football, and also get acquainted with future Conference USA opponents. And you'll play New Mexico State the Saturday after Thanksgiving, so it's a good way to get an idea of how the Aggies look. It's, what, 3 months before they make the trip to Lynchburg. So, uh, you know, even though Liberty's not playing, still good time to sit back, watch some football, and get ready for the upcoming season.
And if you're a true sicko, you'll watch Vanderbilt at Hawaii late at night, like a true college football fan.
Oh gosh, I forgot to mention UConn and Utah State is the game that's right after Nebraska and Northwestern. So have you definitely have your sickos picks for games this Saturday, and of course that will increase tenfold next week.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump right into it. And obviously, the big headline around this team is obviously replacing some quarterback that they had last season. I think that was pretty good. That, of course, is Malik Willis, Coach Hugh Freeze, Cabs, Charlie Brewer, the Baylor slash Utah transfer for the quarterback one right now. But first, how big of a hole and impact is Malik Willis leaving, and how much needs to be made up by this Liberty Flames team as a whole?
Uh, you know, from the outside looking in, you would say, yeah, you're losing a quarterback who was a true dual threat, was a that would could rush for 1,000 yards, could throw for another 2,500, 3,000. But in the way Hugh Freeze's offense works, it's not that tremendous of a loss when you replace him with a game manager like Charlie Brewer, who, we Ken Austin, the quarterbacks coach, went over this with us Tuesday in discussing the decision. Is Brewer's not going to leave the pocket. He's going to keep his eyes down the field. He's going to make sure his receivers are in the right spots to catch passes when the defenses haven't matured, and those safeties and those cornerbacks aren't reading patterns that the receivers are running. So you couple that with a running back group that bef- before the injury bug just bit them really hard was expected to be high quality producers. And you could see probably a more balanced attack than you've seen in the last 2 years with Willis leading the team in rushing. But now you can see some running backs taking over, getting more carries, getting more opportunities. And then that also presents more opportunities for Brewer in the passing game because now defenses are going to need to put an extra body in the box to stop the run game. So I think it's it works out for Liberty that you're going to be you have a offense as diverse as Freeze has, where you can put in a starter like Brewer whose skill set is nowhere near that of Malik Willis, and the offense isn't shouldn't lose a beat at all.
I actually, when I was doing my research, realized how deep this team is in terms of the skill position, and we'll get into that in a moment. But talking about Charlie Brewer and something I brought up on the fast lane this past week, as we're recording, this comes out, Friday, the week of week zero, if you want to call it that in college football. His 2019 at Baylor, his statistics are very comparable to Malik's in 2020. So you take their two best seasons, and you could argue that Charlie Brewer did it over the long run, over, harder opponents because he was in the Big 12 compared to the independent Liberty. But this is a guy, going into the Utah season last year, got replaced by Cam Rising, and Cam Rising led Utah, obviously, to a historic season, the Pac 12 title, a phenomenal Rose Bowl. This was a close battle, and Hugh Freeze has touched on that in his press conferences. How safe do you think the job is for Charlie Brewer in the first couple games this season as the season goes on? Do you think they'll give him a leash, or do you think the leash is short?
I brought this up with Ed actually earlier this week when I was on Monday, and I think the leash is fairly long because um, you look at Brewer, you just look at career starts. Brewer has 42, 39 at Baylor, 3 at Utah. Uh, Jonathan Bennett has 0 career starts. Um, his the only like true meaningful snaps he's gotten in a game where the outcome wasn't decided was last year against North Texas when Willis, thought he had some significant injury with I think it was his left foot, and had to be taken off site to go get X-rays, and then find out, oh, there's nothing wrong with his foot. And Bennett came in and actually played really well during that time, but you can't replace experience. You can't replace the fact that Brewer, as you mentioned, 2019, that year, Baylor played in the Sugar Bowl. So he has big game experience. Playing in Big 12, he's used to playing in very difficult environments, where fans are rabid, um, and he doesn't let that get to him. And, Southern Miss week 1, you're going to face that, especially with a Southern Miss defensive line, or actually look at their defense in total. 9 of their 11 projected starters are transfers, and most of them are from Ole Miss or Mississippi State. So you're facing some really good players, and Brewer's not going to be phased by that. And I think that's why he's going to have a longer leash. And I think unless he has complete duds where he's turning the ball over and there's no rhythm, I think you're going to see him, stay in there. And, as long as he manages the game and keeps, Liberty in it and doesn't lose it, I think he's in there, until something happens.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with it. I think Charlie Brewer was, I would always say, the favorite going in, but I think he's the most logical choice in terms of he might not be the best at any sort of skill set. He just provides the most consistency throughout. Let's move to the running backs. You touched on the injuries. I wanted to highlight Day Hunter, the Hawaii transfer, as someone who is, if you follow me on Twitter at TreyLauVT, has watched many Hawaii games for the past couple of years. This is a very explosive running back, and this is someone who probably adds a different element to the rushing game that they haven't had from the running back position.
Yeah, and you know, for those of us who stay up and watch those 10:30 Eastern kicks from Hawaii, and because those are usually the only games on at that time, you could see that last year he led the team in rushing, and it's not often you go in the transfer portal and get a player who ranked in the top 10 of his conference in rushing yards, and that's what Hunter was able to do. His position coach compares him to, say, a Marshawn Lynch, a Trey Mason, and how he runs violently between the tackles. But then he's not a big guy, but he will run physically behind his pads. And then when he gets to second, third level, he's got another gear. That's what that's what makes me think he can become the first 1,000-yard rusher from a running back standpoint at Liberty since Frankie Hickson in 2019. And Hickson was more of a patient runner. Um, he fell forward quite a bit and could get you those 3, 4, 5, 6 yards of carry without a problem. And then as he developed at Liberty, he got a burst later on and could finish off long runs. And I think Hunter already has that. He goes in as the only healthy, well, as of right now, he's the only healthy running back on scholarship on the team with TJ Green, who transferred in from Utah last year and was actually the top running back in terms of rushing yards. Shadro Lewis, Malik Caper, they both missed practice earlier this week. Caper's been out for more than a week now with an ankle sprain. So it's probably going to fall on Hunter's shoulders early on, and I think he has the ability to produce and complement Brewer and give Liberty, like I mentioned before, that balanced attack.
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly. Let's move to the wide receiver position. A really, deep group. They returned the top two pass catchers from last season in Douglas and Daniels, and a guy we've highlighted multiple times. You've been on the fast lane. The Campbell transfer, Caleb Stevens, who was 1,000-yard receiver last season. This is going to provide, Hugh Freeze and Charlie Brewer a really good repertoire of weapons that is going to add to this passing game this season.
Yeah, I will be remiss if I didn't mention this first. CJ Daniels tore ACL in his right knee earlier back in the spring. He's not going to be back until about mid-season, I would think, at the earliest. They're not going to rush him back because you have, like you mentioned, you have that depth. You have Demario Douglas in the slot, who I will tell you this: NFL scouts are really intrigued by him. He doesn't have the size, but um, scouts who watch Malik Willis quite a bit have commented they really like Demario Douglas because rarely does the first guy bring him down. It takes multiple guys to bring him down, and he's got a twitchy skill set that despite a 5'8" stature, he it's really good. Um, You've mentioned Snead. He brings a different dynamic. He's the only receiver on the roster who has a 1,000-yard season at the college level. That's something that, he knows what he can do. He knows how to win 50-50 balls. He knows how to make big plays. And that's something that Liberty just hasn't had in recent years because Noah Fritz's been hurt. TJ Yarbrough's been hurt. But those guys, Fritz been healthy the entire camp so far. That's a big thing. Yarbrough's back and hopefully, healthy ish and can contribute. And I think, Caleb Coleman's another guy who honestly, for the past 3 seasons, knee injuries have really hurt him. And now it looks back, he's healthy and could contribute. And Liberty does have 6 receivers on the outside who can be in the rotation. And that's a luxury they really haven't had over the last few years. And if you can rotate those 6 guys and really have production all the way across, that's, again, you give Brewer that ability to have multiple options. You throw in the running backs. That's why I think Brewer being the quarterback is not a drop down from Malik Willis at all.
And obviously, with the weapons and the running game, you need a group that can protect him. And, you know, the coaching staff went aggressive in terms of getting offensive linemen, attacking the portal this off season, obviously, with Nasir Watkins from Kentucky, Cam Reddy from Colorado State by way of Boston College. This offensive line is rebuilt a little bit, but is still got some, expectations behind it this season. Do you think they've improved on the offensive line, and what do you expect from them?
They have definitely improved. And another transfer to consider is Xavier Godlin from Tulsa, who, if you look at his Pro Football Focus grade last year, was actually graded fairly well, and he played center in both guard positions. And he's actually slotted right now to probably start at right tackle. Um, this offensive line needs to be better. 51 sacks last year. No matter how you cut it, from whether it's on, you know, Willis pulling it when it should have been a run to the running back, whether it's, he tries to extend plays too much and loses track of receivers, or whether it's just you got beat. 51 sacks just doesn't cut it when over the previous 2 years you only gave up 50 total. So I think this group has improved. You brought in, the 3 graduate transfers, as we've mentioned. You bring in a JUCO transfer and Reggie Young, who was a second team National Junior College All America last year. You combine those 4 with Brendan Schlittler at right guard, Jacob Bodden at left guard, and then Cooper McCall at, whether you have him at left tackle or right tackle. You have a group that's really ready to prove that last year was a fluke. Throwing Chris Planakis, the new offensive line coach, he has brought in a blue collar, hard hat, lunch pail mentality to that offensive line. And they want to be the strength of the offense. And that's something that, you know, as long as that offensive line gets back to where it was back in 2020 when Liberty had one of the nation's top rushing offenses, I think that will be something that will drastically help this team. And if that offensive line plays to the potential that they have, this offense will be better. But if they have a similar season to last year, then kind of all bets are off because Charlie Brewer does have a history of concussions. That was documented at Baylor, does have a document with injuries. So you got to keep him healthy because you can't lose him because then if you're losing him, there's potential, Jonathan Bennett isn't staying clean in the pocket behind him. Kane Salter's not staying clean in the pocket behind him. So it all starts with the offensive line and whether they can, hold up and be the backbone of this offense.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. I think a common theme among the three teams we preview in the Commonwealth is the offensive line, and their make or break really going to decide all three teams' fate this season. We talked a little bit with David Cunningham, and we'll talk a little bit with Greg Betty about UVA's offensive line. But I think you summed up moving to the defense, and I want to plug this again. Dame is broke down position by position, all the position groups, all 10 of them. Newsadvance.com. Make sure you check that out. His Twitter as well at Damien Sordelett on Twitter, and got me a lot of information to get ready for this. And one theme I saw you talked about was stability amongst the defense, kind of revamping that depth that's kind of there. And it is included with the defensive line. You obviously lost some in the portal, but they were able, in graduation, but getting, still having Trayshawn Clark is big and Kennedy Charles that leads the group. And then obviously the transfer Dre Butler. How good can this defensive line be? And, as we expand through the defense, can it really be a strength of this team?
The defensive line is going to need to be the strength because the way that Josh Aldridge and Jack Curtis, the co-defensive coordinators, are looking to spread the stress on the defense this year. And so instead of playing maybe just man free or cut for three in the secondary, you kind of want to put more stress on the defensive line because that's the deepest unit on your team. And that's a strength from Trayshawn Clark and Darrell Johnson coming off edges. I'm going to bring this up. I think Christian Zachary is going to have probably one of the most productive seasons for any backup, whether, from the independent ranks or any group of five team, because he's a special talent. And watching him off the edge in the live scrimmage, 1 week ago, he's fast and he's improved his angles, whether it's a speed rush or just power rush. He is so good off that edge. And at 6'2", 6'3", 260 pounds, he's a menace. And I think with adding him to the rotation on a weekly basis, and then you throw in, like you mentioned, Kendi Charles, meant to mention like Bryce Dixon, the true freshman, is going to be really good in his playing time this year. They can provide a whole lot. And then I need to throw in Akil Washington's moved to linebacker, but he's still going to be used at bandit as a rush end on third down, obvious passing situations. And he was able to get to the quarterback at will last year. So you've got the tools there. And with bringing in Jeremy Garrett, the former NFL defensive line assistant coach, he wasn't like the head of that position. He was more like an analyst, one of those one of those roles that you see, very prominent now in college. He was able to work with a lot of talented defensive linemen, and he's brought those traits here. And I think those guys have really bought in, and you should probably see a lot of production from that defensive end, especially the way, they're just able to get after the quarterback and pin their ears back, especially on obvious second and third down passing situations.
Well, you hit me with a perfect transition. Moving to the linebackers, you lose production. Story Jackson, Rashad Harding. Mike's going to play the Mike in terms of JUCO transfer. Mike Smith Jr. going to probably play their Mike linebacker position, and Akil Washington, as you mentioned, going to play a little bandit, also play the Will linebacker spot. This linebacker group can run six deep, as you wrote in your story about the group. So they're going to have depth that's needed this season, but a lot's going to be looked upon them.
Yeah. As I mentioned, if you go back to 2020, Anthony Butler played, if not 100% of every meaningful snap at Mike linebacker, it was pretty darn close. And then last year, you mentioned Story Jackson, Rashard Harding were on the field quite a bit. But I think with Ahmad Walker getting a lot of reps last year as a true freshman, that's a big help. Having Tyron Dupree as a do-it-all guy whose best game was against Georgia Southern in the 2019 Cure Bowl. You have him available. And then we mentioned Akil Washington. You mentioned Mike Smith Jr. They've got the bodies. And I think Jerome Jolly, a converted safety who's moved down to linebacker, I think you'll see him quite a bit on third downs. And what he brings is an awareness of where he needs to be on the field to really help not let the middle of the field become an opponent's playground. Because there were times last year, Ahmad Walker, just because of the speed of the game, he got lost in coverage on third downs, and that led to some big chunk plays. I think with having Jolly as a converted safety in there on passing situations, he knows how deep he needs to be. He knows how to read things. And I think that's only going to help them moving forward in their rotation of having a guy like that in there. And, that just brings the fact that linebacker core has really developed depth, even though some of those guys haven't played a lot recently. Just the fact that they've got them ready and they should be ready to play come next Saturday. That is going to help this group quite a bit.
Move to the back half of the defense. Javon Scruggs returns for another season. It feels like he's been with the program forever. He's really the leader of this defense. What is his impact on this team, and how important will he be, throughout the season?
Yeah, Javon Scruggs is one of a few guys on this team who's been at Liberty for every year of the FBS tenure. He's included with the six-year seniors in that regard, and he's been starting ever since the 2019 opener. He's the alpha wolf. He's the general. He's the guy that makes everything work in that defense, especially at free safety, one of the most important positions in the defense. He's kind of like that do-it-all guy because he knows all the positions. He's going to make sure everyone's in the right spot, and that's important especially for the secondary, because if you're going to spread the stress, you're going to need to make sure that back end is holding up. And because of his experience, because of his knowledge of the defense, and just with the new co-defensive coordinators, they're not changing up the scheme. The scheme's going to be the same. Verbiage is likely going to be the same. So it's going to be very familiar with a few tweaks here and there. But essentially, he's going to be able to put guys in the right spots. And that's the type of leader and the type of mentor you need, especially for those young guys who are going to get some playing time in the secondary. You need a guy like that. And, he means everything to that defense and will be asked to make, just as many plays as he had in the past couple of years to make sure that defense keeps thriving.
Who are the corners? You talk about versatility. Both the field and strong side. Chris Middleton and DeHaan Anthony, I think I pronounced those names right. They're going to probably be your two starters, I would assume, at corner, as you mentioned in your articles. What kind of ability will they have? How is this cornerback room gonna be for a team that is trying, as you mentioned, gonna stress all phases of this defense?
Yeah, great question. I'll start by saying Liberty had the sixth ranked passing defense in the nation last year, so that's a standard they want to live up to. And I will start with Dejon Anthony over at Boundary. He is the more physical of the two cornerbacks between him and Chris Megginson. he doesn't mind getting, just downright into a brawl with wide receivers. And that will suit him playing there on that short side of the field where you're basically playing in this small little box compared to the field side. So he's going to be really good there. Meganson is more of that long, lanky type of corner who has been playing, exclusively at corner and playing quite a bit since 2020. Um, so you bring those two guys, they know what to do. And I think Kobe Singleton, the transfer from Southern Utah, who was a third team all conference selection last season, has really come along. And I think he can probably play on both sides. If I'm not mistaken, it probably will play on the field side. Now, Marion Williams, who previous position coach Ricky Hunley really raved about him last year. Um, I think he's going to really take a step forward this year, especially under new position coach Darius Eubanks, and really shine over there on the boundary side because he's a competitor. And I guarantee you, he's going to be trying to push Dejon Anthony for playing time immediately. And he's going to want to get in there and mix it up with receivers over there, and he's not going to be afraid to get physical with those guys. And I think that's something that uh, you know with those top four, you've got two really physical cornerbacks and two cornerbacks that are really good in coverage, and I think that's going to help this defense quite a bit with having four guys. I'm sure we'll probably see Antoine Jackson, Dexter Ricks, two really good freshmen. I might get a chance to see them this year, but you don't really have to push them because you got four guys ahead of them who have played and know what to do in this type of defense.
Let's look at the schedule before we talk about the over under of 6.5 wins. Driving around town, you see the billboard, biggest home schedule ever is kind of the phrase, with two home matchups. With BYU, which you can kind of consider a Power 5 team at this point. They're about to be in the Big 12. And then obviously, probably the biggest matchup, at least the biggest home matchup in program history. They're walking the Hokies on November 19th. Do you believe this is just coming in? Obviously, 2020 was probably the best season on the field, but coming into this season, would you argue that this could be the biggest season in this program's history just because of the opponents they will have, especially the opponents they will have at home?
Yeah, you definitely can make that argument because if you look at the entire schedule in entirety, and we'll gloss over the FCS team and then the four teams that are frequently in Ryan McGee's bottom 10 on
Yeah.
ESPN. Um, it's a really competitive schedule. Um, I mentioned this earlier. Southern Miss has 9 transfers projected to start on defense. Most of them are from Mississippi State and Ole Miss. They're going to be a really tough opponent. I think Liberty's only a 3.5 point favorite in that one. So, that's going to be a tough game. UAB was picked to finish second in Conference USA this year, and they're going to be good again this year. And I know people are probably going to look back and say, well, Liberty just went and boat raced them last year down in Birmingham by 24 points. But I think, you know, you overlook that and say, okay, UAB is going to be tough. But yeah, with BYU coming to town week 8, then you mentioned Virginia Tech in, on November 19th. It's the best schedule that they'll have just because of being the independent ranks. And then before moving to Conference USA, the schedule won't have as much appeal. So yes, this is going to be the biggest season for Liberty. And unlike 2020, you brought this up. They had 3 games against ACC teams, but they were all on the road: Syracuse, Virginia Tech, and North Carolina State. So this is the one where you get more exposure, especially at home. And it is the biggest. It will be the biggest season for them, and chance to really show what they can do out on this stage.
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly. Let's look at the 6.5 over under win total, and it's actually interesting. You break the schedule kind of. You can easily get I think 5 wins with Akron, with UMass, UConn, New Mexico State, 4 of the worst Power 5 programs of recent years. We'll see I think all all of those have coaching changes, so we'll see what those happen. You go on the road at ODU, the FCS opponent Gardner Webb. If you look at maybe what could be a quote unquote marquee win, would be on the road at Wake Forest because with the Sam Hartman medical situation, you get him early in the season, and he probably, I'd say probably based off of what I've read and what I've heard about Wake Forest, he probably won't be the quarterback in that game, and that's Sam Hartman's really good, and that's a big bonus. This schedule could set up really well for Liberty, where they're looking at 8-4 was the mark last season. Really, the drop off, if any, in terms of wins, might not happen.
Yeah. They went 7-5 in the regular season last year, got to 8 with the bowl win. I've seen numbers. I've seen 6.5, and I've seen 7.5. If you see 6.5, that might be the number to go for because we have outlined. I think you just outlined there's path to 7. You don't have a slip up like you did last year against Louisiana Monroe when as a 32.5 point favorite, you lost. If you can take care of those 5 winnable games and you get 2 of the quote unquote toss ups against Southern Miss, UAB, and Old Dominion, that gets you to 7. Um, there's a path to 8 if you can get all 3 of those toss ups, and your only losses are to Wake Forest, Arkansas, BYU, and Virginia Tech. I've seen news that Hartman could be back by week 3 against Liberty because the next 2 games after that for Wake Forest are against Clemson and at Florida State. And if Sam
Good luck.
Hartman has a chance, if Sam Hartman has a chance to be back, you want to get him back for that Liberty game so that way he can kind of get into a rhythm because you got the meat of your schedule for Wake Forest, your conference schedule, in those 2 games. And those 2 games could dictate whether Wake Forest remains in the top 25 and remains a viable option to play in the ACC title game for the second straight year. So they got, it all depends whether Hartman comes back or not. I've seen reports that he could be back for week 3 because they want to get him into a rhythm before those 2 gigantic ACC games. So it all depends on whether or not he can, get back or not. Going back to whether, what games Liberty could get, BYU and Virginia Tech, those are 2 games at home that you could win. A lot depends on Virginia Tech and how well Brent Pry does this year, because we know he's got a lot of work to do with rebuilding that. That's been well documented what he's had to do to help get that program back to where they're standing. So we don't know what that's going to look like come week 12 of the 13-week season. And then BYU traveling all the way across the country. Don't know how they're going to fare. I mean, they fared well when they've traveled out here to play Virginia and Charlottesville in the past. But, they're going to stretch. They're coming off. This is really interesting how these schedules are playing because the week before BYU comes to Liberty, they're playing Arkansas. And then, Liberty, of course, plays BYU, has an off week, and then goes to Arkansas. So depends on what happens. So we'll see how that happens. We'll see how that plays out. But if that BYU game could be very gettable if, say, Arkansas, does takes a bite out of BYU, and BYU has to make the trek from Provo to Lynchburg, and Liberty could get them at that point.
Yeah, I would argue, depending on the Sam Hartman situation, the only game that really you would put in like a lock, quote unquote, in the loss column is at Arkansas because, anything can happen when you host a team. I think getting BYU and Virginia Tech at home make those very at least seeing the path to victory because that game is at home. I think I would argue BYU more because I think there'll be a bigger Virginia Tech presence in Williams-Stadium compared to a BYU presence just because it's a 2-hour drive. But I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic how that plays out. And well, Dame, I want to thank you so much for hopping on and previewing this team again. How can you have previews for every position group? How can listeners read that and connect with you?
Yeah, the previews will run through. So Saturday, as you're waking up to watch week 0 games, my final position preview will run at newsadvance.com. That will be on the offensive line. Um, that actually I just posted to the back end of our website, so I know it's gonna go live Saturday. Well, you can read all 10, plus I did, previews of all 12 opponents. They're kind of different than most traditional reads where I highlight who's back, who's not, and this year I added who transferred in to really show, how important the transfer portal's been. Um, and then you can go follow me on Twitter at Damien Sordelett. So I put everything out there. Um, so it's been a busy, I would say, first part of August, with just getting all this preview stuff together and just trying to be as detailed as possible to give fans everything to read. And now I'm looking forward to getting into a game week and getting ready to make the trip out to Hattiesburg. What, a week's time from now, and see that opener in just a few short days.
And it might get more interesting depending on how Brian Harsin does at Auburn. Well, what was that?
Yeah, but I think that boat has sailed on Hugh Freeze. I think he's very happy at Liberty, and I know the people who put out those rumors, and some of them just do it just for the clicks. And so right now,
Really? They do?
yes,
I'm so
they
shocked.
do. They do. Auburn never reached out to him last year, contrary to reports and all that stuff. So, um, I would say Hugh Freeze is very happy and at Liberty, and I don't see him leaving in the foreseeable future.
I'm starting to believe that as well. Well, Dame, thanks for playing along there. Not any clickbait. Damien Sordelett at Damien Sordelett News in Advance. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for listening to this special edition of the Fast Lane season previews as well as game previews all season long on these special editions of the Fast Lane at the Fast Lane with Ed Lane podcast feed as well as our Fast Lane Ed Lane YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining on this special edition of the Fast Lane.